It's that time again. Well, technically that's relative because this show is pre-recorded, so any time really could be that time. And some might even argue that it can't be a specific time more than once because of the laws of entropy, and then others still might argue that that time, as we think of it now, is really just an abstract concept we've created to help measure the gradual decay of the universe, but this is vaguely scientific. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if I am Derek? And how many roads must a man walk down before you can call him Jim the scientist? Hi, Jim.
It's 42. I know this one.
I'm surprised I didn't expect that. And how many Sydneys does it take to screw in a light bulb? I don't know, but our guest this week is Sydney.
1.
It's 1.
I'm capable. I'm a capable
Nice.
Sydney light bulb screwer.
I'm glad, because I really didn't have an answer to that one.
That's fair.
This is the show where listeners send in questions to hear our vaguely scientific answers. Who knows? We might even get some of those answers right. But first, it's time for the fun science fact of the day. Jim?
Ah, yes. Eukaryotic cells like ours, us humans folks, they have a nucleus where all the DNA is housed. However, bacteria cells do not have a nucleus. Their genetic material just kind of floats around loose in the cytoplasm.
Oh. I'm glad you specified that the eukaryotic cells were the kinds we had. 'Cause that was going to be my first question.
Like us adult humans and not other things from another planet.
Ah. It's not just humans that have eukaryotic cells.
That's true, like doggies and mushrooms also.
Yeah, those 3 things.
Yeah, those 3 things.
That's it. Nothing else.
Yeah.
Just
Nothing
humans,
else.
dogs, and mushrooms.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with the fun science fact out of the way, perhaps it is time to move on to the main event, the first part of the main event, the first question for this episode, which comes to us from Addison. What is the difference between a rock, a stone, a pebble, and a boulder? Is it size, weight, mass, composition, or some made-up stuff that doesn't matter?
I mean, all words are made up and don't matter.
Yeah, before researching this, my money was on the made-up stuff that doesn't matter.
I mean, after researching it, I feel like I'm... I did find out, I didn't know this, there are, loose definitions to each one of these.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is sort of made up, and it doesn't really matter, but, if you say one thing, it can mean that one specific thing. So, good for America, or not America, good for English.
Good for English.
Good for Americanish.
It seems almost as if there's 2 different divisions that are in this question. Like you have a rock and a stone, which are kind of interchangeable, and then you have a pebble and a boulder, which are very different. Like if you said, "Hey, go move that boulder over there," I would be like, "You think I'm Superman? I can't move a boulder." But if you actually meant a really small, what I would call a pebble, then there would be confusion.
Right.
But if you said "Go move that rock over there" versus "Go move that stone over there," I would be expecting kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah. One thing that I did see, and I found this on a lot of landscaping websites, is that the sort of loose definition of pebble is that it has to be pretty small, roughly an inch or so, maybe even less than that. But the sort of recurring characteristic that I saw for pebbles is that they had to have been sort of worn smooth, and a lot of times they say specifically by water erosion. So I thought that was really interesting.
That.
Yeah. A lot of landscapers apparently know a lot about these kinds of things.
I guess that makes sense. I saw, so there's a difference between a rock and rock, which is a thing that I because there's a geological definition to a lot of these things. Rock, the word rock can kind of be used the same way the word bug can to encompass a lot of things that aren't technically bugs or aren't technically rock. But so a rock and a stone, they're the same thing. But geologically, rock refers to the natural state of a thing, like a big substance that is made up of a bunch of different minerals. And stone, allegedly, refers to that material if it has been shaped and polished for a specific purpose.
That makes sense. Like a precious stone, like a ruby or like a gemstone. Like you wouldn't call it a gem rock. Like that's weird.
So except for like a diamond ring, they say that the rock.
That's true. They do say a diamond is a rock. So.
But so I mean that's kind of like a material definition. So like you would say a cliff face is made of rock, or you would say rocky cliff, but you would say a stone wall, and you would say a stone bench or a stone countertop. And then I thought it was interesting that pebble, I found a geological definition for that is a small piece of rock that hasn't been polished for a specific purpose, but it has had its edges smoothed away by water erosion.
Okay, yeah.
So I thought that, I mean, and all of these are like not hard definitions.
Yeah.
Which
I feel like I saw all 4 of these on different landscaping websites, and it's like, well, how scientific is that really? The important thing is if you need landscaping done, you know the kind of what to ask for, I guess. If you say, hey, I need like a bucket of pebbles, they'll be like, here you go.
Yeah.
Or more importantly, the landscapers know what their customers want when the customer is like, hey, I want a stone in my front yard. They don't show up with a bunch of little tiny rocks.
Oh, yeah.
And the customer would be upset.
Yeah.
They don't show up with one single boulder the size of a pickup truck.
This is your yard now.
Well, I made the point about them kind of being interchangeable, and I was thinking that like we as English speakers are pretty instinctually good at knowing the difference between like colloquial speech and like specific speech. So like it generally doesn't matter if we call spiders bugs or if we call and I cringe to say this, but if we call tomatoes vegetables, because like we know that bugs can refer to a bunch of creepy crawlies and vegetables can refer to savory produce that you might find in salad. But the reason a tomato is a fruit is because we understand biologically the fruiting body of a plant, right?
Yeah.
So like you could say rock versus stone as much as you want, except when you would then specify that cliff over there is made of stone. That's when like we don't always know that why it's wrong, but we'll kind of hear it and be like, well, I don't know if I would describe it as stone.
Right. I think also the words themselves, and I don't know differences. I don't have another language to compare it to, but at least for English, like stone, it's very smooth sounding. It has that S sound. Yeah. It's very polished, whereas rock, it's very hard. it's like coarse. It's lower. Like it's rock. It's rock. It's harsh. You know, it's a very rough sound. So you wouldn't describe a wall that's very elegant as a rock wall because you're expecting something like coarse and rough, and whereas a stone wall is more elegant and rounded and polished, like all the definitions we've talked about so far. So I think there's a little bit of that too, where our mental images are formed a little bit by how the word itself sounds.
Yeah, that makes sense. The most interesting of the ones listed in the question, so rock, boulder, stone, pebble, etc. That might have been all of them. I don't know. I don't have it in front of me. But the most interesting one for me was boulder, which surprised me. But I learned that boulder comes from like Mid-English or Dutch boulderstone, which literally would translate to boulder stone. And essentially, stone refers to the object itself, and bowl or boulder most likely. So there's two. In Middle English, they think it might come from boulder, which means a loud or a very loud noise. So a loud stone. And the only justification for that is maybe like rock slides.
Oh.
But the more likely root of the word is from bowl, from Dutch, which means round or sphere or globe. It's the same root as where we get ball from. So a boulder is a ball stone. So the definition of boulder I was finding is that it is the substance, the material rock, but it is specifically detached and generally rounded. And that's what like differentiates it from, I guess, just rock in general.
I mean, and that tracks with like the mental image I get when I hear the word boulder. I do think of something that's kind of set apart from the rest of the environment.
Yeah.
Maybe not perfectly rounded like a river stone or something, but a little
Right.
more oblong than just like rough cut.
Yeah. Something
edges.
that definitely could roll down a mountain and cause damage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we get into the muddiness of the definition because essentially it's an isolated rock. It's a piece of a rock that is separated by space around it, I guess. And we talked, Jim and I have talked before about the difference between like an island and a bigger landmass, because Australia is technically an island, but if you go big enough, then all the land masses on Earth are surrounded by water. So like, what's the size limit to island? And so for me, it's kind of like if you go big enough, the planet Earth is an isolated piece of rock. So like, is the Earth a boulder? I don't know.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the Earth.
True.
Besides just the rock. And I mean, I guess no, I'm thinking about it now. Like, I guess a boulder could have like little tiny trees growing on it. Like, I could see that, like little tiny plant life, and that could still be a boulder. So I could see how this idea that the Earth is a boulder has sway.
The only definition that I really could find for a boulder that was sort of more specific than what we've already talked about was that it has to be big enough that that no human could possibly move it just on their own.
Oh, interesting.
Now, again, this is from a landscaping company, so I don't know how scientific that is, but that's like the only definition that I found that was
marketing definition or something.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, I mean, the Earth is just a big rock. How come Addison didn't ask what the difference between a boulder and a planet was?
I was going to bring up, and I avoided it because Jim's here, but I was going to bring up the difference between like planet and dwarf planet and the difference between planet and moon. I guess specifically the difference between planet and moon doesn't really have anything to do with the size. It has to do with what they orbit.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I just want to, like, looking over the question again, the latter half of it, is it size, weight, mass, composition, or some made up stuff that doesn't matter? And I'm just going to say yes.
Yeah.
It is all of those things.
Yeah.
I like it. I do want to go back to the pebble idea, because you talked about how a pebble was worn down by water, which makes me think of sand. Because like sand's just worn down over time, but like you wouldn't think of a bowl of sand as a bowl of pebbles. So
Good point, yeah.
You can't get too small with your pebbles because then it becomes something else.
Yeah, I was reading that like below pebble, you can even go smaller than pebble, and a grain of sand is technically made of the same thing. So yeah. It's almost as if every part of the planet is made up of just infinitely small particles.
You just keep subdividing and subdividing and subdividing.
Jim, there's something to that, I think.
Yeah. Just cutting things in half until you can't anymore. Or cutting things in half until you accidentally trigger a nuclear reaction.
Just what we want.
Okay, stop doing that.
No, I think we've solved it. I think we've thoroughly answered her question.
Yes, we nailed it.
We nailed it. Good job. All right, listeners, let us know what you consider a boulder and a pebble, and I don't know. I think we got it. So we have a second question this week that we should probably try to also nail this one. And this one comes to us from David. Why don't my teeth taste like anything?
Gotta get those flavored teeth.
This just gives me an icky feeling thinking about this. I don't know. Because I was thinking about when you close your eyes, you think you're not seeing anything, but technically you never stop seeing if you are a seeing person. And when your eyes are closed, you are actually seeing like the backs of your eyelids, or not enough light is getting in, but your eyes don't just like turn off. And so my question is, like, are we ever actually not tasting anything?
I mean, the main thing that I saw was the idea of something called sensory specific satiety, something like that.
That sounds close.
Basically what that means is that after a certain amount of input, just certain senses will start to ignore things. Kind of like how you never see your nose until you think about looking for your nose.
Why'd you have to say that?
Because it's the best example of it.
Now I see my nose.
Yeah. Or like how you don't really think about feeling your clothes until you think about feeling your clothes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I feel my clothes a lot, but I think that's a me thing.
But yeah, what I was reading was mostly just like the idea that one of the reasons maybe we don't taste our teeth is just because like they're there all the time, so our brain just ignores them altogether.
This is off topic a little bit, but like, have you ever put your hand on like another part of your body? Like say you put your hand on your forearm or something, and there's a difference in temperature, but like technically what's happening is the colder part of your body is absorbing the heat from the warmer part of your body. So like at the same time you feel both warm and cold. Have you ever done that? I think that's weird.
My feet are always cold, so.
Yeah. I do know exactly what you're talking about, and I've never thought of that as an odd sensation. I've never questioned why my body can feel two different temperatures at the same time, but now I'm going to. So thank you for that, Derek.
This is what we do here. I'm expanding minds with my inanities.
Oh man, no, but so like my question, so we taste our teeth all the time, so we can't taste them, but like, if we were to eat someone else's teeth, would those teeth have a flavor? Like, I know that a person's teeth.
Oh, no.
But, like, would they have an inherent flavor?
That's where I knew we were going.
Just not have flavor.
Gotta eat them spicy teeth.
So the thing that I was reading, and I don't know how true this is, because I don't understand biology well enough, but I was reading that, like, most of our sensation of taste we get from when our saliva can dissolve things. And I read somewhere that the explanation of why the inside of your mouth doesn't really taste is because your saliva can't dissolve your teeth or the inside of your mouth, which makes sense because you wouldn't want it to, but I don't know how true that is.
Yeah, I have thoughts here. I'm still thinking, so like, what if it's your tooth? Like, you knock out a tooth. Like, has anyone ever lost a tooth? Like, does that have a taste sensation, or is it just the feeling
just blood
of like the loose tooth in your mouth?
I mean, I've tasted blood before, yeah.
Sure. That's not your teeth.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to Google something that'll put me on a list, but we'll see. What do other people's teeth taste like?
I don't think that's going to put you on a list. I've definitely looked up way worse things than that.
Because, like, I guess, at least I don't generally eat bones, like, of animals and stuff. Like, I, like, pick the meat off the bone. I don't usually swallow the bone. I try very hard not to swallow the bone. And
that's a good point, because when you do, even if you, like, chew on the bones of, like, a chicken wing or something, you can taste the marrow, and you can taste whatever flavors have kind of seeped into it, but not necessarily just the bone itself.
Right. It kind of is like just like tofu. It just absorbs everything else. But maybe that's just because of the way, like, I'm not eating raw chicken.
True.
It's been cooked. So maybe that's why the bone has flavor like that. Which I would assume would be very similar to your teeth.
Yeah, so if you cooked your teeth.
Right. With some garlic and olive oil, then they taste better.
Really fry them up.
So for the listeners who are curious about the results of my Google search, I'm finding that most people, I'll leave those people nameless, report that typically you'll taste blood, or you might taste like remnants of other food that they've eaten, or plaque is the big thing.
Oh,
so,
great.
Right. So the blood makes sense if it's somebody else's like disembodied tooth. But again, these are all things that are coding. I'm sorry, this was the question we agreed on.
But no, I mean, the coding does bring up a good point too, because at least for me, like if I wake up in the morning and I have really bad morning breath, like I can taste that usually that I have bad morning breath before like I breathe out on anyone. Like there's like a sense in my mouth, like I know that there's plaque or whatever bacteria, whatever it is that grew overnight that's causing this odor in my mouth, and therefore also a taste. So maybe the teeth themselves really don't have a flavor, and it's just everything else you put on them.
I could buy that, yeah.
Yeah, because the only time I'm really aware of it is if I've like forgotten to brush my teeth.
Sure.
One of the other things that I was looking at was that there's also the way that our taste buds work is that they get, various molecules from different chemicals, and those sort of bind to receptors and that sort of thing. And I would assume in a perfect world, our teeth are not like flaking molecules off that our taste buds would be therefore receiving.
Right.
That would make sense.
Yeah, it probably would mean your teeth wouldn't last too long if they're constantly losing molecules in your mouth.
Yeah.
What are we, beavers?
I wonder what a beaver's teeth taste like. I don't actually wonder that, just to be clear. It was just a joke. I don't want to know what anyone else's or anything else's teeth taste like.
What's really interesting about this question to me is the fact that I can't find like a real scientific answer for it.
Well, how would you go about studying this? Like, do you have to find human teeth and like cut them onto pieces and serve them to people? Like, no ethical board's gonna approve a study like that.
But I think Jim got as close as I was able to get, which is like parts of your teeth aren't flaking off. But like even that, unless correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but like I didn't find any scholarly sources that said that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't look into it very far. I was just thinking of like how our taste buds work. So
right,
but I would think that what Sydney said is probably pretty accurate. Is that we're tasting things that are on our teeth and in our mouth, kind of that sort of thing.
An interesting way to look at the answer to the question, because the question says, why don't my teeth taste like anything? But I suspect other people's teeth also don't taste like things, and then that's the answer. It's just teeth in general. I would be more confused if like other people's teeth did taste like stuff. Then I would constantly have that in the back of my mind, be like, I wonder what my teeth would taste like to someone else.
Yeah, that's a weird thought.
It's a weird thought.
Just pour them in a bowl like cereal. Actually, there's a wrestler whose his name is Danhausen, and this is professional wrestling, so it's all fake, And one of his moves is that he gets a jar of teeth and pours them into the opponent's mouth.
Well, then that opponent should know what teeth taste like.
That's right. We got to call up people that Danhausen has wrestled and be like, what do teeth taste like?
I'm going back to the cereal thing. Like, so most people have milk with their cereal, right? So you have this bowl of milk and teeth. Like, the teeth start to absorb the milk, and then they taste like milk. Like, did we just defeat the purpose of the whole test?
You can't. That's like people who cook venison, but they don't like the taste of venison, so they always like mask the flavor in a marinade. And it's like, why don't you just eat tofu?
The first time I had venison, none of us knew it was venison. I'm still not entirely sure. I was a kid, so I'm not entirely sure how the woman cooked it. Like, my friend's mom cooked it thinking it was something else, but she cooked it, served it to all of us. We all were like, that doesn't taste like beef. And then her husband's like, that's because it's deer. And yeah, that was the first time I had venison.
Okay. All right, listeners, we have, maybe you don't want it after the last one, but we have another question this week. We have a third question this week. And question 3 is, do you have an inner monologue? Yes.
Yes, also.
I also, yes.
All right. See you next time.
I'm going to guess that this question probably referenced, and I've heard this before, And I think it's wild that some people don't. In fact, a lot of people don't have inner monologues, and I can't wrap my head around that at all.
Can I say I've never spoken to anyone who has claimed not to, but I have read about them.
I feel like I know someone or did know someone that said they didn't, but I can't remember who it is for the life of me.
Okay.
So my partner doesn't have the same type of inner monologue as I do. Like, he doesn't hear words in his head. Like, I hear
Okay.
my thoughts and like they're narrating, but he doesn't like, he just has thoughts, and he's tried to explain it to me, and I can't really understand it.
I have to talk to him
but
more.
when he has like a song stuck in his head, or like he's acting out something, whatever, like when I would do it in my head, he has to verbally do it. Like, it has to come out aloud.
Interesting.
Because like he doesn't have that verbal inner monologue like I do. Like, he has thoughts, obviously. He's
right.
thinking, he's processing, but it's not the same way.
So, I don't know where to go from there. I have a few different places I can pick up. So when we talk, quote unquote, talk in our heads, we're actually activating the same part of our brain that we do when we're just speaking, but what we're not doing is activating our vocal cords, which is why a lot of times people will read out loud, because like they're already, like they're doing the same thing. All they're doing is making it audible. And then a lot of people, I am one of these people, have trouble focusing if I'm like thinking a complex thought in my head. If I don't verbalize it, I have trouble like finishing the sentence. If that makes sense. These are all very personal experiences, so I know they're not going to be like universal, but doing my best to explain the machinations of my brain.
Yeah, it's really, as I was like looking into this and also just sort of like thinking about how I think, I realized that explaining how I think is way weirder than I thought it would be. Because, like, sure, I have an inner monologue, but I'm not always necessarily thinking about the inner monologue. It just sort of exists and is like in the background. And then, like, if something important happens, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And then sometimes I just think in abstract thoughts. Like, I don't have a voice all the time. It's just sort of context dependent. So
I wanted to say, like, sometimes when I don't think in words, it's things that are more like impulsive. Like, I'll get up and like, it's dark, so I'll turn the light on or something like that. But I won't be like, in my head, it is dark, I should turn the light on. I'll just do it. And that's a response to a stimulus. But it's like, it's still a thought. So it's it's like not an articulated thought, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure. No, I feel like for me, as soon as I start thinking about my inner monologue, then I can't separate myself from my inner monologue. So like, so whenever I start thinking about thinking, all I can hear is my inner monologue, which isn't always my voice. Like, sometimes it'll have like, not in like a weird way. Like, I'm not like, I don't know how to say this, but like, like conversations, but like to help me think through things. So like, it's not always just like me narrating what's happening.
Right.
It's like different thought processes.
It's almost kind of like doing, like, you'll have the counterpoint in your head.
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah, like a devil's advocate type thing.
So like you're your own devil's advocate to like reason through something you're trying to figure out. That makes sense to me. I wanted to define monologue a little bit, not the literal definition to the word monologue, but because that's just one person speaking and that's simple enough. But because I have talked to people who have looked at like a comic book panel and thought it was weird that, say, Spider-Man narrates, I have to get into that next room to save the person or something like that. It's like, it's weird that he's like saying that because he's not talking to anybody. And I'm like, but that is like a thought process you would have. And that's different from something that I think happens more commonly in movies where a character will be directly speaking to the audience, which I would say is narration. So that's actually a storytelling. But these like seeing glimpses into the characters' brains to have them kind of like, oh no, if I flip this switch, then this will happen. You know, that's just, I don't know. I think that's what happens in my brain. Like, that's how I think through things. So maybe I have spoken to people that don't have an inner monologue and They just didn't say that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think how you think is so important to you as a person that, you hear words that are used often like inner monologue or narration or whatever the case may be. And no matter what your actual thinking pattern may be, you just assume, well, this must be what people mean because that's
Right.
what I do and that's how I get through my day. So that must be what they mean by an inner monologue. But yeah, maybe it's not. Like for me, I guess again, it depends on like what you're saying, Derek, like what you're doing. Like it's not like I'm conscious of it all the time, but whenever I start becoming conscious of it, then I can't like become unconscious of it. And it is almost a narration at times.
It's like breathing. It's like
Yeah.
once you become aware of breathing, then you forget how to do it autonomously.
Yes. But it is interesting because you mentioned about the part of your brain that activates is the same as speaking.
Yeah.
Because I remember, now this is going way back, but I remember I took in college a developmental psychology course, and we were looking at language growth. And I don't remember exactly everything, but I do remember like that's something that young children often don't have, is that they don't know how to like to think in their heads. They only can seem to think aloud. And one of my favorite stories is about the same time that I was taking this developmental psychology class in college. I was babysitting a young boy, and he was like 2.5, but he spoke a lot. And I was putting him to sleep, and he called me in at one point, and he's like, Sydney, my brother's allergic to fish, and he ate goldfish. Is he gonna be okay? I was like, what? And like, he didn't really care what my response was. I was just like his thoughts as he was falling asleep, and he needed to say them aloud. And it was just, so I do think it's a little bit, that inner monologue is perhaps a little bit of a learned thing too.
Oh, interesting.
We as a society can't just say everything that's going through our head aloud. So we've learned to not.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's why, I'd be really curious, like the people who just don't have a filter, if that's why they don't have a filter, because they can't just say those things to themselves.
That's interesting. I don't think that I would say that as a hard rule, but I do think there's a sample I can give you that regular listeners will know. My brother is an actor. He also has Tourette's. When he's in a play, I will read lines with him so that he will get his lines down. And a thing that I will always have to point out that he does is when I am reading a character opposite him, he will be mouthing the words, which I've read that a lot of people do. I forget who famously, I'm going to look this up, but there was a person who was not an act. Oh, it was Will Smith. That's who it was. In the first episode, and you can actually see this, in the first episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Will Smith is mouthing everyone else's lines while they're saying them. And they've cut most of it out, but like you can catch him doing it if you're actually looking for it. And he said that was the first time he had ever acted before. And it's because he was so worried about memorizing his own lines, he learned everyone else's parts as well. And he just subconsciously would do that because in his brain he was thinking their lines, but he didn't tell himself not to activate his mouth. And that is a tick that my brother has, that he will, if he knows what somebody else is going to say, he'll like say it in his head. And sometimes he has to be conscious not to open his mouth.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I have noticed about myself is that I frequently have music playing in my head, and it does not seem to affect my thoughts, which is good. So,
one day I was at work with a coworker, and I was just standing in the middle of the office, and I was dancing. And my coworker, and I just think this makes my coworker a killjoy, but he was like, "Why are you dancing? There's no music." And you know, a normal person might say something like, "Oh, I just felt like it," or whatever. But my response was, "There's always music."
It's kind of beautiful, though. I mean, even if it's not in your head, like you can just find the music and the rhythm of the everyday, or there could be music playing in your head. Either way, I like it. It's a nice response.
I don't need to specify.
Right. It's kind of a beautiful response.
I tend to confuse people with these types of responses because it makes perfect sense to me because I have all of the context.
Right.
Sydney said something a little bit ago that this isn't exactly the same point, but when you mentioned that it's not necessarily your own voice that is talking to you, that led me to what if it was literally somebody else's voice. And the reason I bring this up is I've spoken to people who learned English as a second language, but have lived in an English speaking culture for so long that they're very fluent, and it's kind of like gotten to the point where now they think in English. And I've heard stories about them having dreams about their family from like Spanish speaking countries. The person that I'm referring to is from Spain. And they said it's just bizarre that they'll have dreams about their mother and father and they'll be speaking English. And it's so odd because just they think in English now.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's so weird.
I feel like that would be a really jarring experience. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be weird. So I used to know German more than I do now. I don't practice it so much anymore, but there were a couple of times where I would every so often dream in German, and it was weird. Or like one time, sorry, we're going on a tangent.
No, that's fine.
One time there was a dream where like someone was speaking German, but I was speaking English, but I knew they were speaking German. And I'm sure it was nonsense. Like, you know, dreams make sense of things. Like, I'm sure it wasn't true German that I was hearing in my brain, but like I was understanding, quote unquote, their German that they were speaking in the dream. Dreamscapes are a whole other interesting area.
I find it fascinating. And a lot of people will say it. People don't like it when you tell them about your dreams. And I'm like, I love it. I just am so fascinated by the possibilities that, I don't know. I really like mythology though. So I've always been really interested in like the Aboriginal, like the Australian Aboriginal idea of the dream time.
Oh,
I think that's like all of, to summarize, to oversimplify, this is a huge oversimplification. Everything that will ever exist already exists in the dream time, and it coming into existence is the dream becoming real. And I think that's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I'll have to look more into that. I'm not familiar at all with that.
It's been done in a lot of different fantasy stories, again, to oversimplified and fantastical ways, but it's like an actual cultural kind of myth, I suppose. There's one more thing I wanted to bring up about the idea of in an inner monologue, and that is the idea of something called linguistic determinism. Some psychologists are already cringing, but don't worry. This originally starts with 1984, the idea of newspeak. People have developed a way of thinking so as to suppress like the thoughts that they can have, the emotions that they can actually have, and just the way people think. And there is a science fiction idea that the language you speak and the limitations of that language can determine how you think. And at this point, I want to stress, nobody thinks this is true. If anybody claims that it is true, ignore them. They are incorrect. But it's interesting to explore, and the best way I can kind of put it is like you can feel something that you don't actually know how to put into words. And it makes it hard to express it, but you still feel it. And this is an example. We talked about children before, that they don't necessarily know how to describe what they're feeling. So like if a child hasn't learned the nuances of the word sad, for example, so like when we say sad, it could be like you're grieving. It could be you feel kind of depressed. It could be you, somebody offended you or something and it hurt your feelings. Those are all, we have other words more specific, but those would all kind of fall under the umbrella sad. So a child who only knows sad, like to think that they can't experience all the nuances of the feeling would be a little silly, I think. And in a similar way, a more cultural way, in ancient Greek, they had a bunch of different words for different kinds of what we would translate as love. So they had a different word for friendly love, romantic love, the love of an experience, universal love for a people. But in English, we say love and then add a qualifier to it. And,
yeah.
And what's kind of interesting, it doesn't change the fact that you can experience those different kinds of love, but it does make our culture a little weird at times when we think using the word love makes us uncomfortable or something. So like there's a limitation in how the culture communicates, but it's not a limitation in how you think, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, linguistic determinism also makes me think of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is like the same idea that it's like the way that you think about reality is very determined by, very relative to the language that you have, and has been tested a lot of different times. Again, psychological research, and again used in fantasy a lot because it's so compelling to think like, oh, if you don't have the words for this concept, you can't understand it. But,
right.
I mean, I tend to think that, like you were saying, Derek, like you can still feel these things, you can still experience them, but of course, if you have a frame of reference, you're going to be able to express it better.
Yeah.
And maybe think about it better and get a clearer understanding of what you actually are experiencing. But I think that experience itself is still going to happen. You just maybe won't frame it the same way. You won't understand it the same way, but like that ultimate experience is still happening.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, we teach children, right? Like, we can see children who haven't learned these things, but then to take that idea, which it's been done a lot in Star Trek, I know, and then, like, the most famous example is the government using it to suppress people in 1984. The idea that were actually true is almost kind of the idea of looking at other languages, other cultures as more primitive for that reason. So like, I think it's just kind of silly to assume that child doesn't know the word to express that they are, that they're offended that somebody called them dumb. Therefore, they must not be possibly able to comprehend it. Like nobody thinks that.
Right. Yeah.
And the way that the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis gets expanded in fantasy too are movies like Arrival, where like we physically can't understand all the nature of our universe until we have this other form of language, which if you're familiar with the movie Arrival with Amy Adams, she's a linguist. There's this alien that lands, they can't figure out how to communicate with it, and basically it has a very complicated understanding of time and space.
Okay.
And when she finally learns the language, spoiler alert if anyone has not seen this movie, when she finally learns the language, she understands time and space completely differently, and the whole movie kind of starts to come together, and you realize that you've been watching it out of order.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's like a super compelling idea of like our language physically shapes our understanding of reality, but I don't seem to think that it holds up. Like, I think we have these experiences, and these experiences are concrete, and how we understand them might change, but like, it's not, the experience itself won't change, just our interpretation of said experience changes.
Yeah.
That's very similar to the premise of Slaughterhouse-Five, in theme, not in actual plot. But like, I thought that was interesting, because in Slaughterhouse-Five, the whole story is written out of order, but it's deliberately written out of order because the main character lives his life out of order. And at one point he is abducted by aliens called Tralfamadorians who live in the fourth dimension, and they see all of time at the same, as all visible, but they can choose where they want to look at a specific moment in time. And it's, I don't know, it's a fun idea. I like that book. It's
it's a super, super compelling idea. And I think, I don't know, there's some, obviously humans like to think about not seeing the world as we currently do. Take that how you want, but very compelling.
I was going to say maybe the time to make this joke has passed, but Jim and I have joked before that a good alternate title to this podcast is Spoiler Alert.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the different ways that we experience the world, because I mean, a long time ago, maybe it wasn't that long ago, we talked about like do we even see the same colors that other people see?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Does the color,
That's a
yeah,
great
does the
question.
color that I see as green correspond to the color that you see as blue and things like that? And it's just so interesting because there gets to a point where our experiences become too personal and there's no way to share them. And I think that's fascinating because when you break it down to a very granular level, there are just certain things that you cannot explain to somebody else. Like, you see the color red and you cannot explain the redness to someone. It's just like a facet of the world around you. And I just think that's super cool. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that's the same way with, how we all think. Like I said, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to explain how I think. And it's like, sure, there's some words in there. There are some abstract thoughts in there. There's a lot of music in there, but like, how do I explain how that creates a sentence that is something that other people can comprehend? Because when I'm talking, I don't think about the words that I'm saying. They just sort of come out. It's not like there's not like a voice in my head saying the words three or four words ahead and I catch up to it or anything like that. It's just the words form and they are the coherent thoughts that I have. And I can't explain that at all. Like, now that I'm really thinking about it, that's weird.
That's right. The technical term for that in philosophy is a hard concept as opposed to an easy concept, which I just think it's fun that it's hard. We don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Part of it makes me think maybe there's like a subconscious layer below that where the words can form for you and you just don't think about it.
Ooh. There's, I don't remember the math on this, but there's a Vsauce video that I watched where they talked about your perception of reality is a fraction of a second behind when it actually happens. Because like you can really only form your thoughts through your perceived memory. And these are, again, all philosophical things that like I don't know that there's any tangible way to prove it, but it's just fascinating to think about.
Well, if different creatures have different speeds of mental processing, would that mean everyone's reality is occurring at a different speed? Like, if like a mouse, and I don't know, I'm just using mouse for an example, but like if a mouse's neurons and memory can process faster than a human's, like, are they perceiving events?
We currently think that insects view the world in slow motion compared to what we do. I haven't done enough of the research on that. I just know that there is a comic I've read. It's a Flash comic in which he describes the fact that he thinks super fast, and that is basically the whole world moves in slow motion for him. And like, that makes sense to me. But there is another comic, and I'm going to call it out. It's a Deathstroke comic, where he describes him thinking so fast is because his senses are so fast that he can actually see faster than other people. And like, that's dumb.
He can see faster than the speed of light.
Because that implies that, like, why would the stimulus be getting to your eyes faster than it is getting to anyone else's? But like slowing down the processing speed, or like speeding up processing speed and seeing the world in slow motion, that is actually kind of like conceivable to me.
Yeah.
It's like the idea that like our pets, if you put like a TV screen on front of them, don't see the fluid motion that we see.
Oh,
they have receptors in their eyes, so they see like individual images.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think I've seen a video or two where they sort of like show like, here's what your dog would see on the screen, and it's like, yeah, it's like it's stilted and weird, and that reminds me though of like watching my son learn how to speak, and there's a lot of muscle memory involved in that, and we don't always get it right, as adults, but there's certain words that he can't say, and it's always the same words, but sometimes if I sound it out, he'll say it right that one time, and then he'll say it wrong later on. Like, there's the TV show Bluey, but he always calls it Bully because he can't get the letters in the right order, and he's so used to saying it that way now.
When I was a kid, I used to like York peppermint patties. It was a thing that I don't really like them anymore, but that's for the sake of the story here. But for whatever
York
reason,
peppermint patties.
they're not my favorite. I'm not anti York peppermint patty or anything.
You gotta freeze them. They taste best.
I was gonna say that. I freeze everything. I freeze Kit Kats and Reese's bars, and everything is frozen. What was I saying?
When you were younger.
When I was younger, yes, thank you. When I was younger, I used to really like York peppermint patties, but I would always call them patty peppers. And I think that's in my head. I didn't know that it was wrong, and everyone just said, "Oh, we know what you mean by that." So they just like went with it. And then I learned it was wrong, and I am mad nobody corrected me. End of rant.
Yeah, similarly, I didn't say ambulance, I said ambulance, but everyone just thought it was funny and they enjoyed it, and so they didn't correct me for like years. I'm saying like I didn't say ambulance until I was like 10 years old because no one corrected me and I didn't know it was wrong.
I learned the word, I'm sorry, because I feel like I cut Jim off, but this is another. I learned the word barracks, military barracks, from a book, from reading it, and I thought it was pronounced barracks because that's the way that, and I never heard anyone say it aloud until I was in college, to the point where I pronounced it barracks, and everybody was like, "Why do you say it like that?" And I was like, "How is it supposed to be said? I don't like, look at how it's spelled. It seems like it's barracks."
That's like, my wife actually has a few words like that because she reads constantly. And there are a couple words that she read long before she ever heard them said out loud. And one of them's hyperbole, but she always says hyperbole.
Yeah.
And like, I know what she means. And I'm like, I've corrected her a few times, but it's like, you're an adult. I don't need to correct you. And so it's like, but it's interesting because that's something that it seems to be very common, is that like, if you read a word way before you ever like hear it out loud, then that's just sort of sticks with you for a while.
Because your inner monologue is making up how it's said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I say hyperbole sometimes on purpose.
Mm-hmm. I when I was a kid, I used to say pretzel for pretzel, and sometimes I just say it on purpose because I just think it sounds cool.
I say island if I'm writing it. If I'm writing island, I say island.
Yeah, it's like February.
Yeah. February.
Spell it correctly, February.
Mm-hmm. I always say Wednesday.
Oh, yeah.
Another one. All right, listeners, why don't your inner monologues taste like anything? Jim, do we have any listener mail this week?
We do. And as always, if you want to send us listener mail, you can email us at feedback@vaguelyscientific.com. You can comment on our blog. You can like us on Facebook. You can tweet at vaguelysci. And this email comes to us from Conical Cactus and comes to us in regards to episode 88. Or no, I'm sorry. This is actually the bonus question that we put out that was cut from episode 88 about time tourism and where you would go. And the email reads, for the time tourism thing, I would definitely go way back in time and invent a bunch of new constellations. Then I'd make cave paintings of them and confuse all the modern archaeologists.
I love it.
I want to know if conical cactus is related to tactful cactus.
Ooh, I love tactful cactus. There's also tiny cactus.
Obscure references. Woo!
Yeah. Good luck finding that one out, audience. Well, thank you very much for that email. And if you have a question that needs to be answered in a vaguely scientific manner, please email us at questions@vaguelyscientific.com. If you want to get our episodes the minute that they're released, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and all the other great places that cool podcasts like to hang out. And don't forget, subscribing and leaving feedback really helps us out, and so does telling your friends.
And make sure you activate your vocal cords when you tell them so they can hear you.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our vaguely musical intro is composed by Anthony Pizzelli. And don't forget to check out our merch store over at vaguelyscientific.threadless.com. There's only like a number of shopping days until Christmas, so buy something for your friends that you like. So buy something for friends, the friends that you like, but also buy them something that you think is cool, that you also will think they're cool. Just buy something from us, please.
When this episode comes out, I don't think anything they order is getting there in time for Christmas.
I don't know. When's this episode coming?
December 6th, I think.
Maybe. I think
Maybe
shipping's pretty reasonable. I don't know. Or they could just like overnight it. They could pay like $30 extra.
Yeah, but we don't see any
Depends
of
on
that.
where it's going, I suppose, right?
That's true too. Yeah.
That's fair.
We don't get a cut of the shipping costs, so slow and steady wins the race.
All right. Well, thank you to Sydney for being our guest. I hope you had a good time.
I did. This was a lot of fun. Thank you guys.
Yay.
Excellent. Please come back.
For Vaguely Scientific, I am Derek.
I'm Jim.
Oh, I'm Sydney.
I always love it when it's their first time.
Yeah.
And tune in next time when we'll talk about, I don't know, snow or something.
Toodaloo.
The joke there was that we already recorded it, so we are talking about snow.
I was going to ask that because I couldn't remember what we talked about. And I was like, I could scroll down in the show notes, but